Joining us on the Heister Automotive Group hotline is an old friend of ours. He used to cover college basketball here in the Triangle for the Fayetteville Observer. Now he's covering the Chicago Bears for the Chicago Tribune. It is Dan Wiederer. Dan, how are you, man?
It's great to see you, Joe. It's great to talk to you. It's been ages since I covered college basketball down there, and that's scary for me because when I was down there in September and Jon Scheyer was telling me that these players at Duke didn't remember anything about his playing career, I was like, man, how old does that make me, right?
It makes us all old. Yes, because for you, trust me, it was a surprise to see you at Cameron Indoor Stadium for Jon Scheyer's first season press conference back in September as they're getting ready for practice. I was like, dude, what are you doing here? And then the light bulb went on. Chicago guy, Mr. Basketball, all that fun stuff, playing for a Chicago guy and Mike Krzyzewski. Of course the Chicago paper would want something about Jon Scheyer. So what did you kind of gather in the time that you spent talking to Jon Scheyer and kind of revisiting his playing time, which you covered, and where he is now?
Joe, this was super cool for me because I have a unique perspective on this, given that I did cover the entirety of Jon's 4-year playing career at Duke. Met him for the first time when he was being recruited, when he was just a star here in the Chicago suburbs at Glenbrook North High School. And so we go back, 18, 19 years now, and to kind of know parts of his journey, but not all of it, I was able to fill in some of those gaps. And I think what resonates with me the most as it relates to the current day challenge that Jon's taking on is that the dude is wired with this admirable fearlessness that the stakes, the pressure, the scope, the magnitude of everything that he's taking on not only doesn't intimidate him, but it actually invigorates him. And it's such a cool life skill to have that I wish I could just instantly take some of Jon's blood, inject it into my kids and be like, I hope you guys go through life with this approach where challenge actually excites you and it doesn't throw you back ever. And I think that's been one of the coolest things in reconnecting with Jon is just seeing the approach he's taking into this, which, as you know, down there, the pressure is huge, the shadow is bigger, and the stakes are as big as they can get. And Jon's just ready for it.
Dan Wiederer, Chicago Tribune, joining us here on the OG. Dan used to cover college basketball here in the Triangle. Now he's covering the Bears. And it's not just Duke. He has a book that you can still buy today, Blue Streak, which covered the 2009 national championship for the Tar Heels. And that's followed up by the 2010 national championship for the Duke Blue Devils, which was a surprise for everybody in Indianapolis. It's not lost on me that he was an assistant when they won the national championship in 2015, again in Indianapolis. And here is, I think, for the most part, the actual debut for Jon Scheyer for the national TV audience in the Champions Classic tonight against Kansas, which is taking place where?
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis is a good spot for things Duke and maybe even Jon Scheyer. So when you, and Gilio and I have talked to him, but when you've talked to Jon about the challenge of replacing Mike Krzyzewski, the idea is who wants that? Who really wants to follow it, considering there's a long history of disappointment of being the guy who follows the guy. UCLA has seen that. There were struggles at UNC when Dean Smith retired and Bill Guthridge was gone in 3 years. So what is his general attitude that you picked up on?
Well, I think what is really cool about Jon is he knows all of this and he's prepared himself, right? Even before there was any rumblings that Coach K was going to be leaving or announcing a final season or whatnot, Jon was preparing to go get a head coaching job somewhere, right? And even before he got the Duke job, he interviews at UNLV, interviews here back home in Chicago, which at the time for him was like a dream moment to interview at DePaul. Right? I could go home and get my first head coaching job where I'm from, right? That's invigorating. In retrospect, that's ridiculous, right? Because of what he stumbles into a few months later with everything that happened at Duke. But I think Jon's preparation has been going on for decades, really in the coaching world now for the last 9 years. And so when it became obvious that Duke was going to be the place that he was either going to be a candidate or selected, right? He's done the preparation. He looked into UCLA. He studied North Carolina. He went in the NFL world and tried to take some research on Sean McVay to figure out how a guy that young could overcome some hurdles of inexperience and age to become a star in the coaching world quickly. And so there's this thirst for knowledge, this thirst for preparation. And then what everybody that knows Jon over the course of his basketball journey will tell you is the guy has just been born with an innate feel for the game, right? Like just sees things, feels things, understands the way that hardwood surfs, right? And like how you got to move around that and create space and do this and create, so there's that. And then there's just the understanding that this dude is a team builder, right? Like he understands what it looks like to build a team as a player, as a star player in high school, as a captain at Duke, and then now for the last 9 years, trying to put the pieces together of all these different Duke teams to elevate them to the level that the program expects. And so now, you jump into this, and for as much that is there on his plate, you say he's prepared. He's prepared himself.
Dan Wiederer joining us, Chicago Tribune, here on the Heister Automotive Group Hotline. It's the OG alongside Joe Giglio. I'm Joe Ovies. You can read that piece on Jon Scheyer, which, again, it talks about – you can read that piece, which I think Pocket comes in at 44 minutes of an average read time, if I'm not mistaken. I appreciate the Pocket feature that tells me how long the read is. But to kind of wrap the conversation on Jon Scheyer before we move to the Chicago Bears, who you cover, you started out in a way that I think people might have forgotten. I mean, he wanted to play.
Yeah.
And he has this catastrophic eye injury that keeps him from playing. And he was convinced that he was going to be a member of the Miami Heat, right? I'm going to make it, as he put it in your story.
Yeah.
But every time he's been met with this kind of difficulty, it's bounced back into something that's worked out for him. I think that's the innate ability for things to have worked out or be okay. And I got to imagine that attitude presents itself now being the head coach at Duke.
Yeah, well, and also I was surprised, Joe, because when the first time I got together with Jon was this summer here in Northbrook, where he's from, and we got together at Starbucks just to catch up. And I said something to him about, hey, man, you've been living like this basketball fairy tale for 25 years. And he was quick to hit the pause button and say, well, hold up a minute. This hasn't been some linear fairy tale rise. Like every part of my journey has included some sort of setback that has challenged me to pick myself up and motivate myself to be even better. And, so that's in high school. It's losing in the state tournament as a freshman and then cutting out the newspaper clipping the next day with your picture face down in depression on the floor and saying, I'm never taking this picture down until I win a state title in high school, and then making sure that you do, right? And then in Duke, you remember that freshman season that was, 11 losses, 4 in a row in the middle of the year, 4 more in a row to end the year, the Virginia Commonwealth loss where Eric Maynor hits the game winner in Buffalo over Scheyer. Well, now you've got to pick yourself up in the program. And, in my story, there's a lengthy dissertation on that run that 2010 team went on after their last loss at College Park in March of that year. And so Jon had to pick himself up there. And then the most catastrophic thing in his life is that fluke eye injury, just a few months after winning the national championship. And he has this, optic nerve, just severely damaged, retina torn, eyelid lacerated, everything that goes with it. And now all of a sudden your playing career is derailed. And look, when Jon tells you he was going to make the Miami Heat, it comes from a place of both confidence and reality, right? Like this is the first year of the LeBron, Wade, Bosh trio. And he said, you know what that team needed? That team needed guys who could shoot, who cost nothing, right? Yeah. Like, so he was going to be a minimum salary guy coming off the bench to hit down jumpers. And he to this day is certain that if he didn't suffer that eye injury, he would have been on that roster and been part of that ride, right? And so that's pretty cool. Well, then you suffer the eye injury and your time with the Heat is done, and you try to make it in camp with the Clippers and you don't get it done there, and you've got to go to Israel and Spain, and you spend some time in the G League. And for a guy who wrote down in high school that his number one basketball goal was to play in the NBA, it hurt him deeply to never get there, right? And to have everything that he worked for basically interrupted by that injury and force him to reinvent himself. And he reinvents himself at age 25 as a college basketball coach back home, not here in Evanston with Chris Collins in his first job at Northwestern, back at Duke, where Coach K said, you'd be an idiot not to come back to Duke, right? And Jon said, okay, Coach, I will never disagree with you. And so Jon goes back to Duke and starts an apprenticeship there. I thought one of the better quotes from Lance Thomas was that when you take somebody who is like Jon, who is a student of the game and is so vastly immersed in studying basketball, and you put him next to the best teacher that there's ever been in the game, of course this is the result, right? Like, of course the guy's going to push himself to new heights. He's going to have guidance that no one else has. And here we are, Jon Scheyer, head basketball coach at Duke, taking the Blue Devils to Indianapolis to play Kansas.
Dan Wiederer, Chicago Tribune, used to cover college basketball here in the Triangle. Now he's covering the Chicago Bears, and do you feel like you've got a nice little break, not talking about Justin Fields or maybe dealing with people who are not happy with your pessimism or realistic takes on the Bears, despite the fact that Justin Fields has replaced Patrick Mahomes on my fantasy team? Just saying.
Look, and you're probably going to win your league because of that. I mean, what we've witnessed over the last month here in Chicago is something that we've never witnessed here in Chicago, a quarterback that is a fireworks show, and not just once every month, it's once every quarter, Joe. And so that, like, this is a guy who's just making highlight reel electric plays on an every week basis now, and the Bears are scoring 30 points a game, which they couldn't score north of 21 for 3 years. The last 3 years under Matt Nagy, which led to, Mitch Trubisky, just to bring up a North Carolina name, getting shown the door, and then Andy Dalton not working out, and then all these other things, Nick Foles, all this carousel. Well, now people here say, oh my God, the quarterback carousel may stop spinning, right? Like, we may have a guy that can stay here for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years as a starter and be an absolute playmaker. So it's really cool to be part of it. I still try to warn people, much to their chagrin, that this franchise is 1,500 miles from actually winning a meaningful championship. And that should be your ultimate goal. It shouldn't just be, checking the box. And so having a franchise quarterback, prerequisite for success, not a guarantee. People don't want to hear that right now, and maybe I need to mute that for a little bit.
Yeah, probably the best case. Dan Wiederer, check out that feature in the Chicago Tribune. It's excellent. Highly recommend it. We appreciate you dropping by, and I'm glad that we got your Coach K impersonation, just a smidge of it.
Yeah, the smidge is all I can give you. So yeah, it was good. It was good connecting with Coach again too. So that was fun for me as well.